how Brexit might affect the education system in the UK. I think it's something that is affecting kind of professionals a lot more, and companies, and thinking about, particularly, for example, in the city, people are kind of moving away to European capitals. But I'm not really sure how it's going to affect the makeup of the student populations in schools, unless, for example, you have fewer European students going to study in independent schools and boarding schools, things like this. For example, at my school, at sixth form, there were 50% Germans. I went to Malvern College, so 50% Germans in the sixth form. So presumably schools like that, where they have a very large intake of European students, might be affected by Brexit if European parents are thinking, no, actually, I don't want to send my children to the UK, because presumably the chances of getting a job in the UK, if that was the plan in the first place, diminished. So I think it could be, but I haven't read anything about that. So I'm sure Professor Lenon has more insights about that particular issue.
Is it something, so either Brexit or there be no change? Is it something that we know schools are preparing for at the moment?
I don't myself think that Brexit will have any impact on schools. Brexit is mainly about trade terms. I think that German parents will still be perfectly happy to send their children to Malvern, so that they learn English and learn about English culture, because after all, they can do the IB in Germany if they want to.
That's right.
So I don't think there will be any significant impact. I think some schools will not have extra spaces, in which case the extra Hong Kong applicants will be competing with other applicants in the normal way, in the way that Hong Kong applicants have done for the last 20 or 30 years. There'll be some schools that will create extra spaces, and there'll be quite a lot of schools that have spaces. We know that quite a lot of boarding schools have some spare places. So I mean, in general, the mood is that we're very much looking forward to having extra Hong Kong applicants, and we're very keen to welcome them to the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. That is the general mood.
So from what I understand, currently the most popular languages in the UK are French, German, Spanish, but also obviously Mandarin is growing a lot. So, I mean, Hong Kong students will have an advantage in that because they already have the Mandarin that they're learning at schools. I think in terms of picking the right language, again, it would be a question of looking at the school and looking at what languages are offered at that particular school, at the target school, and then presumably working backwards and seeing if you can get some beginner lessons in that language, so that the child isn't too far behind once they start. But I think there's also another dimension. If you're not really sure what school you're going to apply to, maybe you're thinking about this in 2 years' time. I think it's also a question of looking at this particular student's abilities. I can see this with some students here. Some of them have been kind of taken to German really well, and I know they would have struggled with French because of the pronunciation, and or because students have some Latin, so they start German and it's not so scary. So I think it's to do with the particular profile of the student, and to also see what they're interested in. Right, some students really like Roman mythology, so they're naturally drawn to Latin, or Greek, of course. But yeah, I would say that if you're kind of a mathsy, logical kind of person, then you might want to start with classical languages. But equally, if you're thinking about the practical aspects and want to be able to converse with lots of people, and you're interested in Latin America, for example, then obviously take Spanish. But again, I think first of all is look at the schools. If you have a target school in mind, look at the languages that you have there, and secondly, ask your child, or consider your child's own profile and interests in general.
First of all, at Harrow, if I was taking a Hong Kong boy aged 13 who'd never studied French or Latin, I would sometimes allow them to simply not do French and Latin. All the other boys were doing French and Latin, but they were remitted or excused doing French and Latin, and instead they would have extra classes in Mandarin. They would go forward to take the Mandarin exams. So they would have a language. And secondly, they might have, they might have 3 or 4 free lessons in the week, which they could use for doing extra work. And even in music instrumental practice, I mean, many of the boys I took from Hong Kong learned a musical instrument. So I'm really mentioning this as an illustration of the fact that sometimes schools can be quite flexible. And these are, and it's worth your parents having these thoughts in their minds. If I was to advise a boy who was perfectly happy to learn a new language, I would say, well, do Spanish. Start Spanish from scratch, really only because very few of my pupils at Harrow would ever have studied Spanish before, so they would be at the same point as them, whereas they will wouldn't, on the whole, would have learned some French. So Spanish was a better choice.